afternoon, everyone. I'm back again. For those of you who were not online earlier when I first introduced our keynote speaker, my name is Sarah Ripp. I'm the Assistant Director for the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies Program. And I am thrilled to introduce Dr. David Kiefer, who's going to give a talk on ethnobotany and integrative health. I think that his presentation is going to be a really wonderful segue, or I should say the last presentation was a wonderful segue into this presentation. In particular, some of the comments that Luis made regarding indigenous communities and their use of traditional plants and preservation of nature so that people have access to these native plants, etc. So before we get into those details, though, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kiefer. David Kiefer is a board-certified family physician with extensive experience in botanical and integrative medicine. His research and teaching activities encompass both national and international universities and conferences. He has a focus on Latin American ethnobotany and evidence-based herbal medicine. He is a clinical professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at UW-Madison, as well as on the faculty at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health. He's also an affiliate of my program, the Latin American Studies program at UW, and we've heard him give some fascinating presentations in the past. Dr. Kiefer's past work has included teaching naturopathic medical students at Bastyr University in Seattle, as well as supervising family medicine residents at a homeless youth clinic. He completed a fellowship at the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona, where he was an assistant clinical professor of medicine for many years. Dr. Kiefer graduated from the University of Wisconsin, Medical School in Madison, and completed his residency training at the Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kiefer to our workshop today. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everybody. Really great to be here. Just such an honor to be a part of today and all the topics. It's certainly really fun to listen to Luis and Dr. Richter. So thank you for that presentation, and I guess I'll try to continue some of those ideas humbly about my work in Ecuador and other places. And I do have some slides. We'll see if I can figure this out. Do you want me to try and share those then, Sarah?
Yes, I would love to give that a shot. I have it set up here, so I'm hoping we can make this work. Let's see here.
Okay, great.
Let me
Thank you all for your patience. There'll be time at the end for questions, and we'll do maybe the same thing that we did in the last presentation using the chat, the raise hand function. If you feel like you have a compelling and timely question in the middle of this, please feel free. I don't know that I'll necessarily be able to see that when I'm in so-called presenter mode, but I'll try. All right.
Is it up there?
It's up there. I think it's on the second slide, which is, it's totally fine. There we go. That's the title slide. And
I don't want to show your notes though. Let's see, what am I doing wrong here?
It looks good on our end. It's only
does it? Oh, yeah. It's okay. So you only see the
great
presentation slide itself. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to click through the slides, David, or are you gonna? Or I guess I need to if I'm sharing it, right? So.
I think I'll have you do it. Yeah.
Yep. That's okay. I will mute myself, and you just let me know when you want me to slide to the next one.
Okay. All right. Well, I wasn't exactly sure which track to take here, but I will try to blend the concepts of botany and the cultural uses of plants with a medicinal bent, and integrative health, which is it's a bit of a specialty field nowadays that I guess used to be called holistic medicine or alternative medicine, and the newer term is integrative health. The idea of weaving a variety of healing modalities into patient care. Next slide, please. And by way of learning objectives, I guess it's hardwired into me when doing a talk. I actually decided to do these in the form of rhetorical questions, because you can probably guess what I might think about the answers to all of these. But as I thought about what to talk about today, I wondered about these things. Like, is there a role for plants in so-called modern, or what we might refer to as conventional medicine nowadays? And if so, which plants might we think are the best ones? Is there a role for plants, medicinal plants or otherwise, in our daily lives? Again, you can imagine the answers to these. And is there a contribution of cultural knowledge from the global community to the way that we think about plants? So these might be some of the things that we can, as a group, as much as possible in this type of online environment, think about and try to answer in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. And you can kind of just click through this. Yeah, these, you already heard a little bit about my background. I'm a Wisconsin guy, and then went out to Seattle for residency, studied with Andrew Weil, who will be pictured here in a second. He is an integrative health, natural medicine physician, mostly in practice down in Arizona. And he had a 2-year training program, which back in the day helped me really to learn a lot about these concepts. And the next slide, please. But I'm less interested in my own background than I am in all of you. If you feel like it, let's use the chat function and comment on this. So let's just say that you happen to feel a little under the weather today. And maybe go back a slide there, Sarah. Thank you. You've got a scratchy throat, maybe some muscle aches, you know, that runny nose, congestion, perhaps you checked your temperature. Maybe it was running around 99 or 100. Sometimes we refer to that as a low grade temperature. And you did a very reputable home test for SARS-CoV-2 for a coronavirus infection, and it came back negative. Let's just think about this. I mean, we probably all had a cold virus at some time in our life. What are 3 things that you might do? 3 anything, and obviously only share things that you feel comfortable with. You don't have to put anything in the chat. I would just be really curious to see what you all come up with. So if you feel like it and it works, all right, thank you. I see some things starting to show up in here. Thank you very much. Yeah. And then I would encourage you to look at the list that's starting to show up, what people are doing. I love it. Excellent, thank you. All right. Hey, I'm learning some things here too. Ooh, I love it. Thank you, Louise. All right. And part of the reason that I do this is for us to look at 2 main things. One is look at the similarities that might come up, and then look at the differences. And if we had more time together, we could spend some time exploring the origin of this information. When I do this for classes face-to-face, I spend some time talking to people about where they learned what to do. Some people mention family members, some people mention friends, books, their barber, their hairdresser, their dentist. We get information from all kinds of people in the community, from our ancestors, from written material. And I love it. Seeing all kinds of interesting commonalities showing up here, and certainly the differences. So that is really, I think, rich material, just a simple discussion here about a health condition and where we turn and what we do to try to help ourselves feel better. So thank you all for doing that, who participated. And let me have you, Sarah, if you can, go to the next slide. Of course, I should participate in this, and I probably would have made a decoction of ginger root. A decoction means I would slice off some ginger root in small pieces and boil it for a certain period of time and drink that. I may venture into echinacea, which is the other plant pictured there. Echinacea purpurea is one of the species that I find particularly useful as an antiviral and immune stimulant. And then I thought about this, and I would probably try to sweat it out. I might sit in a sauna or, exercise gently and try to get things moving. And then I thought about, like, where did that come from? And I think it came from the next slide. Yeah, in my background, so my grandmother's name was Opal Pansy. And here I am at the age of maybe 1. And we worked with grandma a lot in her garden. It was a huge garden. You can see me toiling away in the hot sun, no hat, probably no sunblock back in the day. And so, she ran the farm. She had lots of plants that she knew about. We worked a lot when we were young to help her out whenever we could. So I think maybe that's a little bit of what framed my answer to that question, and also a little bit of the background that I'll bring to the rest of the talk today. Next slide, please. Yeah, and these were books that she had laying around. I mean, I probably wanted a coloring book of some sort, or maybe a children's book. I'm sure there were some of those as well, but these are things that were on her shelf. And so from a very early age, we had the chance to learn about plants and different remedies that were important to her. Next slide. And then I went to medical school. This is a picture of the desk that I had. And maybe if you all could look at that picture and just observe what state the plants are in a conventional medical school. The plants are all dead and or in various states of dying, or they've been processed into paper and are huge stacks. So this is my symbolic picture of what happens and happened a lot 20 plus years ago in medical school, where despite that background and my interests in plants, there wasn't a lot of training in the topic. And yet at the same time, I was interested in it and trying to learn about it. Next slide. If you do some digging out there in the world, and I guess we can click through this, there's probably another couple of clicks. Yep, perfect. And one more. With respect to, or let's go back one, sorry. With respect to plant diversity on the planet, we think that there might be about 300,000 angiosperms. These are flowering plants like the ones pictured here. Probably 300 in the United States are used pretty regularly as medicinals, but I'm guessing that's an understatement. There's a huge community garden in Madison at Eagle Heights, and there's probably well over 1,000 plant species out there that are food or medicine plants. So 300 is probably just the retail market, but not what's happening in informal gardening. And so at the same time that my plants were dying in my office in medical school, I was like, well, what about this huge diversity in all these plants that are out there? And the next slide. Well, and certainly we could, with Luisa's help and Dr. Richter's help, talk about traditional knowledge. And it goes back centuries, if not thousands of years. This is a figurine from southern North America of probably a shaman, maybe a healer that's eating a peyote cactus, and probably was used in a ceremony of some sort. And this knowledge is rich. It is, traditional healers of different backgrounds and trainings have wisdom that is incredible. When plants that are favorites of different healers are looked at, for instance, this was one study in Belize where they looked at the favorite plants from different curanderos or shamans and just tested them through laboratory assays and found that it didn't matter whether or not they used the plants against the human immunodeficiency virus. They were active against it because that almost like over centuries and lots of trial and error that healers had settled on some of the strong plants that are out there in nature. And same thing in Samoa. plants that are used by healers there invariably have stronger efficacy. So that knowledge is rich. And, as I'm learning about this and trying to figure out like how should this really frame my practice as a family doctor, I realized that I needed to go elsewhere other than my medical school to look for information. And thankfully, I got a grant back in the day to go to Ecuador, which is an interesting continuance of our last talk. So next slide, please. And I won't talk too much about the different areas of Ecuador, but just such an amazing country with rich traditions and culture throughout. And I spent most of my time in the Oriente, or east of the Andes, in the foothills of the Andes along the Napo River. Next slide. A biological reserve was there that had lots of plants and primary forest, and also a lot of the employees of Hatun Sacha had incredible knowledge of the plants that were being used in that area. And this is just one list of some of the species. So this relatively small area had, over almost 2,000 plant species, lots of them being used medicinally. So just another reaffirmation that, the lack of information in medical school was certainly a deficiency in the greater global context. Next slide. Yeah, this was my life in Hatun Sacha, is trying to follow people around. This was one of the forest guides. He had the cuchillo, or knife, or machete, that was cleaning through the forest. And I did the best I could to keep up as he was doing that and pointing things out. And it was just, for me, with an interest in plants, to be around people with all of that knowledge and background. It was just, I felt like a child in a candy store. Next slide. We could spend days, years discussing all the plants. I'm very sensitive to not sharing too much of plant knowledge without permission. But I thought this one was okay as oregano, a very common plant that we're all familiar with. And it has a rich history of use throughout the world. And it's not just as, a dried sprinkle on top of a slice of pizza. And I was very intrigued to learn about its use for things that I never would have guessed, such as fever in children, or as a treatment for diarrhea. And then also pictured in that slide is another plant. Its Quechua name of Chontachiri, a species that at that time we hadn't really figured out yet. And it just really also broadened out my knowledge of what does it mean for a plant to be useful and to help out humans in some way. And I never had thought to turn to plants for a shampoo or to help out with hair loss, which is called alopecia. And so just, two small examples of a rich use of plants for all kinds of human needs, I guess we could say. But it really did make me wonder, like, what is up with the state of affairs with plants and plant use, and how to weave them into, I guess, conventional medicine in my own backyard. And so looking more into it, there's a couple of, I guess, bottlenecks or reasons that plants haven't been explored as much. And it's, this is, again, could be a huge topic, but two facts really struck me and gave me pause and made me, wonder what to do about that. On the next slide. And one is that, there's strong and robust traditional knowledge all over the world of really powerful plants. And, we could spend a long time about ways that has not been honored, or that the intellectual property has been taken without people's permission. And at the same time, as far as looking at the chemical background and, some of the possible ways that plants could be used, it hasn't taken place. So there's a gap there. And, if we have time, I'd love to know people's thoughts about, if they have experience in what we could do to remedy that. And then the other is that, some people in so-called modern medicine think that we don't need the plants anymore. We don't need the traditional knowledge because we have very well-funded chemistry labs. Well, the reality is that the chemical compounds that nature has come up with over millions and millions of years are in many cases extremely complicated, and it is not possible to make them in a chemistry lab. So there's the extreme and important need for us to continue to rely on nature and the healing remedies that come from nature into the future. So again, these are things that were on my mind, and I was trying to figure out how was that going to help me with my patient care. Next slide. And this is a little bit of the transition. That black arrow doesn't show up super well, but what I meant for this slide was to symbolize this idea of moving from a pharmaceutical. This is a little bit of the reverse order of what I was being taught at the time, moving from a pharmaceutical to a plant. So Aricept is a pill pharmaceutical medicine that's been developed to help people with dementia or memory loss of various types, including Alzheimer's. And at the same time, there's some really interesting data that ginkgo leaf extracts can do some of the same things. Ginkgo leaf, it's a very interesting tree. It's not native to the area here, but seems to grow very well in cities. Maybe some of you have seen it in your neighborhoods. Maybe you planted one. There's one growing behind the botany building on the UW campus that's thriving. And so, what can we do to make this transition when it's appropriate to a natural product? Next slide, please. Sarah, you're doing great, by the way. Thank you so much. And this, as I'm trying to think about this and try to, figure out what role are plants going to serve for my future practice working with patients. I mean, I needed help is the bottom line, and I needed to turn to the community because the reality is that this is not just one person or one plant or one patient, but we're all in this together. We all should be working together and trying to solve these issues of health and wellness in the community as a collective. And I encourage medical students and physicians to look around them and get to know their herbal team in their communities who has the herbal knowledge and collaborate together. And in some cases at UW, I've had the true honor to work with some local healers and kind of do a co-lecture for the physicians in training, which has been really, really exciting. And we make teas and share our wisdom back and forth. And a lot of my work back in Madison, when I came back from my travels, were in the Latinx community, and the community groups and the people I was able to work with just were so welcoming and generous. And we all worked together to put together guidebooks about herbal medicines that were commonly used in the community in order to bring to clinics so that patients had something written that they could share with their physicians and make sure that it helped out with their patient care. And so these are some of the people that, for a field like ethnobotany, which is very interdisciplinary, it was a great chance for folks from family medicine and botany, anthropology, Latin American studies, global health, and pharmacy to kind of all work together. It was just really exciting and rich. Next page. And from all of that work together, we learned a bunch of things. And Sarah, I guess I can have you, yeah, click through that, thank you. And there might be one more, that's good. In the United States, like in many other places, herbal medicine is extremely common. You might even think yourself about teas that you regularly ingest, or maybe medicinal capsules or extracts that you use for different things. And depending on who we ask, that use percentage is somewhere around 20-30% or even more. In some of the community group interviews that I did, 100% of people would use plants before they even went to the clinic for a variety of different health conditions. And there's just so many different plants out there. I love this term that I saw in the literature. And we talk about polypharmacy, which is people that take a lot of different pharmaceutical medicines. And then I saw published polyherbacy in the same context of like, well, we need to be careful that people aren't taking too many plants. And I'm like, is that even possible? Like, I almost thought that polyherbacy was a good thing. But it probably depends on what those plants are and what they're being used for. And there's just still a lot of unknowns about, which plants people are using and where they come from. Are they growing them? Are they receiving plants from relatives in the mail? Different herbal stores or grocery stores. And I just think it's really interesting to think about plants and their sourcing and the knowledge behind that plant use. Next slide, please. And certainly from my work in clinics in the Madison area, it's extremely important, I think, for all healthcare providers to know about these plants. I can think about stories I've heard from my patients where they say, yeah, I used this before I came to clinic. And if the provider shows skepticism or doesn't know about that treatment, it's a little bit of a disincentive for patients to share more information going forward. So, this idea of let's learn about, each other and our backgrounds, and that creates this just wonderful relationship and trust. And on the flip side, if that doesn't happen, there's not good communication. Patients may not in the future disclose or share everything that they're doing outside of clinic. And I think that that's not a good plan, as we try to come up with the best treatment approach for somebody. Next slide. And also with all of the community members that I was able to work with and healers, both abroad and in the area in the Madison area, I learned so much about different philosophies and approaches to health and healing. And this is a huge topic. If I thought about resources to share with you, it would be hard for me to limit it to 100. And so just know that if you have an interest in a particular demographic area of the world, region, city, that there may be some really neat resources published on that. So I encourage you to, think about your particular interests and background and what you want to learn. I do know that the disease model that we use in the United States, which works fairly well for some medical conditions. And I'm thinking about, all the money we put into emergency rooms and hospitals that are super effective for those accidents that might happen, or severe and dangerous illness. That type of disease management model is quite a bit different than the way that people in other places, other cultures, other countries think about health more preventatively. And there's a whole topic of herbal medicines, or a whole, genre of herbal medicines called adaptogens. And these are plants that are taken on a more long-term basis in order to keep your body and maybe your mind strong and prevent illness. It's not super common. I think it's really ironic that I'm talking about this right now and I hear sirens in the background. And so maybe that's the hospital-based system that's reminding me to not minimize how important it is. I don't know. Anyway, this preventive, or let's keep our bodies resilient and strong and resist illness as much as we can, I think is a really important concept that, as much as I can, I try to weave into my my current clinical practice. Examples of adaptogens might be Asian or Korean ginseng. The Latin name is Panax ginseng. That's a very interesting root that's used for healing. A mushroom extract called cordyceps falls into that category. These plants often have antioxidant or anti-inflammatory effects on our physiology. And we know that inflammation and oxidation can be the root cause of many different diseases and disorders. So I think it's pretty interesting to think about these plants that in some cultures have these robust effects. And then there's a lot of different descriptors for how plants or nutrition might work, for instance, in a culture that don't translate well into not necessarily just English, but the way that Western medicine thinks about disease. For instance, using a plant for your nerves, or when you miss home, or after heavy meals, or for the heart. So sometimes that doesn't fit exactly with the way that I might think about aspirin, for instance, when we use that for someone who's just had a heart attack. Next slide. And as a deeper dive into this concept, with the Latinx community that I was talking with, and they say this is para el corazón, or for the heart, and mentioned a few plants. And some of these kind of fit. Like we think about celery maybe more as a food plant, and garlic, you know, is something that you put into a stir fry. But garlic's fascinating. That plant, when used on a regular basis, we think can take the edge off of someone that has high cholesterol or high blood pressure. And in fact, probably does help the blood vessels a little bit. So, you know, traditional use, centuries, thousands of years of use of these compounds has settled on an indirect way to help the heart, just as has made its way into language and cultural beliefs. So this has just been such an exciting journey for me to keep in mind and keep an open mind about different ways to think about health, and that sometimes leads to really interesting treatments. Next slide. And this is another thing that, I mean, thankfully, there is such a robust discussion happening about nutrition in this culture. In food medicines, I've seen talks and conferences that are based on food medicines now. And as much as this feels new to a lot of us in this area, the idea of the health behind nutrition, eating, community meals, this is not new. And you know, I've learned a lot about this recently. I'm certainly not the expert that probably should be talking about it much, other than I spend a lot of time now talking to my patients about their nutrition. And here's just one example from some of my Mexican patients or Mexican American patients who regularly weave the prickly pear cactus into their diet. Nopal or nopalitos is the pad. Sometimes you can use the little tops there. You see the red flower coming out of the top, which is called tuna in some areas. And the pads certainly need to be a little careful in your preparation there. There are some spines on there that have to be removed, but the inside of that cactus is really high in polysaccharides, like a very important fiber that when regularly consumed helps people that have diabetes and helps to lower their blood sugars that might otherwise spike after meals. We know that fiber has other important effects on kind of supporting a healthy microbiome, those bacteria that live in our colon, our large intestine, and decreasing the absorption of fats and cholesterols into our bloodstream. So another important cholesterol treatment. So the idea that foods and what you eat on a regular basis can have these really profound medicinal effects, again, in many places is not new. But certainly given the paucity of nutrition education I received in medical school, this is an area for Western medicine, conventional medicine to work on for sure. And the same thing has to do with a lot of the spices that were that are from all over the world and have been a part of cuisine for a long time. We could have a whole nother lecture just on spices and their really interesting physiological effects. Next slide, please. Yeah, this might look familiar to some of you who, in particular, walk into, say, a Latino grocery store, and you'll see a whole wall of La Costanita. And this is a brand name of all kinds of different spices. But I look at that and I'm like, medicine, that's a medicine. Oh, there's another medicine. So that overlap between herbs and spices and how we can use those to promote health and wellness. Next slide, please. Well, I couldn't end an ethnobotany talk without talking about uña de gato, or cat's claw. This is a vine it grows in several different countries in South America, found in the Amazon rainforest. It's in the Rubiaceae plant family, which has also given us coffee, which we could probably have an herbal medicine talk about coffee too. Maybe that'll be next year. But I think this is a really, really fascinating plant. Has a long history of use in many indigenous cultures. And one group, the Ashaninka in Peru, know it as Saventaro, or the powerful plant. And so much research has been done about this now, but it's got these really interesting alkaloids. And I put a positive next to the pentacyclic. So different plants make different of these alkaloids. One plant will have the pentacyclic, and the positive means that it helps out our physiology, like it has positive effects. And other plants that look exactly like the pentacyclic plants have the tetracyclic alkaloids, a different type of chemical, which, if mixed together, would antidote or cancel out the pentacyclic ones, or even have maybe a slightly negative effect. To a botanist, scientist, these plants look exactly the same, but you only want to harvest the pentacyclic ones. And what researchers and anthropologists have realized is that the curanderos, or medicine experts in these cultures, have figured out how to only harvest the chemotype, or the ones that have the right chemicals. And at last look, when I was last kind of delving into this, the scientific trained researchers still couldn't figure out how that identification happened. And I think it's a beautiful example of a really interesting plant where it's the traditional knowledge that's crucial to learning most about this. So, really making sure that that gets honored, respected, and incorporated into, plant use if it's decided that's a good idea. And the next slide, please. This one has been, again, studied in many different ways, and it has all those interesting effects. If the pentacyclic ones are used, we know here in the US that extracts of this are used for arthritis, and very, very effectively. So it's one that I will recommend to people sometimes, and you can find it pretty commonly I do admit that for this one, I haven't done my homework as much as I should about sourcing and intellectual property. So that's always something that we need to keep in mind before we, regularly use a plant. Next slide. And I guess this all boils down to when a patient is in front of you, what do you do? And this was a teaching case that myself and other people at the university put together. This was an iStock photo. And I was drawing on experience I had with some patients that I'd worked with in the past. And we created this case of a gentleman that had diabetes. DM2 is type 2 diabetes, and had been on 2 of those different medicines. And it had 2 recent episodes where his blood sugar went way down in a really dangerous way. And we had this case where the doctor was talking to this patient and said, "Are you using any medicinal plants?" And he answered, "No." "And are you using any herbals?" And he said, "No." And so then the teaching point here is how important it is to branch out our question asking and to know something about, obviously, our patients and their background. And what might be involved with this dangerous low blood sugar. And in this case, it was simply that over the past couple of weeks, he had been eating more of the nopalitos, the prickly pear cactus. And that importance of the nutrition in the context of the medicines that somebody's taking and how they can interact in that way. And so this was just a very simplified example of a greater discussion that I'm hoping happens between all patients and their physicians. Next slide, please. That next one. So this is a lot of what I think herbal medicine looks like in the United States. And I hope you're chuckling to yourself because it's quite a bit different than going into your garden and harvesting a plant. So many products are available in different forms and, bottles. And so trying to figure out about all this, I feel like that's most of what my clinic is like now. But I love having that discussion, really trying to understand people's belief in herbal medicines, in vitamins, their health and wellness. And a lot of people will bring different and kind of unique beliefs into that discussion. And it's only with an open-minded and kind of rich relationship that you have the right discussion and kind of understand the best approach. Next slide, please. And so that's why, I feel like at least when I'm one-on-one with somebody in clinic, that I'm trying to keep all these factors in mind of background and belief, and that, I have a little bit of a specific type of clinic where I do integrative health consults where people come to me for a second opinion. So I would say often, usually plant medicines are involved in what we talk about. In other clinics, when I've worked in the urgent care, for instance, that comes up a little bit less often. But nonetheless, like if we believe the research about how common ethnobotanical or plant medicine use is in the community, that every clinic visit truly is an intercultural interaction. Next slide. So if I were to venture a quick summary before we can launch into a Q&A, for fear of simplifying this too much, there are a lot of different plants out there all over the world. These plants are moving around, are being planted in places where they didn't originally grow, are being sent through the mail. They've woven their way into all of our backgrounds in very unique and individualized ways. I found many of them have interesting effects and are potentially useful to help out with a huge variety of clinical conditions. And I still think it's minimized in modern medicine, which hopefully all of us can work together to remedy, pun intended. It really makes me need to make sure that I am looking elsewhere for knowledge. Like I can't just, rely on the science that is driving medicine in the United States. I need to, look elsewhere to community and healers in the area. Traditional knowledge I'm finding to be super useful in filling the gaps from what I can find on my internet databases. And I certainly try to weave this information into regular treatment plans. Next slide, which I think is the last. I came up with a new title. I think we should call this Ethnobotany and the Provision of Intercultural Healthcare. Oh, which I spelled wrong. Sorry about that. I will fix that before next year's presentation. Thank you all for your attention. This was but we're just dipping our toes into the sea of herbal knowledge there. I will leave you with that symbolism because we're looking at the sea right now.
Thank you so much, David. That was fascinating, and I'm very excited to hear what questions are going to pop up. If any of my colleagues could possibly stop my sharing, I seem to have lost I can't seem to access the little button that it's hiding at the bottom. Someone fixed it for me, I think. You guys don't see my screen anymore, I'm assuming. Okay.
Yeah, it looks good now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Wow, we actually have a lot of questions here already. Or wait, not questions. I guess there were some commentary earlier when you were asking for treatments people would access. And let's see here. Okay, I jumped the gun. I couldn't see the chat earlier, but okay, as Andrea mentioned, you can certainly raise your hand. It looks like we already have a hand raised, or you can put your questions in the chat. So I'll start with Laura. Laura, please go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your question. I think maybe someone else needs to unmute her. Let's see. Can I unmute you? Oh, wait, here we go.
Hi, thanks so much. This was really fascinating and definitely along the lines I've been researching myself lately too, inspired by the book about blue zones where the doctor studied centenarians around the world and their eating habits and looking at what they eat, but also just what their life intakes and connecting that to happiness. They looked at diet, but they also looked at connections with family and things like that. But thinking about food as medicine, that functional medicine kind of aspect where you're looking at diet as medicine. And I think that we are behind compared to other countries in that, but we have a lot to learn that way. And I wonder if, I know there's starting to be new resources coming out, but that's great that you're looking at that in connection with, Western medicine, looking and understanding that it needs to be the big picture, the full person as part of it. So I think that's a start where it's starting in the offices and teaching the people to ask those questions and understand that it's all connected. But I wonder how to keep it affordable. I think sometimes too, I go to a naturopath and the supplement list that I get and have to buy is overwhelming and daunting and unaffordable for me. So I think, how can we keep it so that it's accessible to everybody and that we can start the conversation to get more people excited about it and into it to lower those costs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great questions. You highlighted some important issues, and maybe that's why we're all here together, is for us to work on this in our respective communities and keep bringing this up. I think when you bring it up with your physicians, the more physicians that are trained in integrative health, then there'll be somebody in systems where you are that have this knowledge. And if your doctor, PA, nurse practitioner doesn't really know, they'll have somewhere to send you so you can get that information. So I think, there's lots of trainings happening now to make sure that MDs and medical schools are starting to get up to speed on these topics. So I think it's starting to happen. The naturopathic medical community, I think, is robust. They have licensure in Wisconsin now, which is going to really help, I think, to get insurance coverage and all kinds of things that will help, promote their knowledge, which is absolutely along these lines. Knowing about nutrition, community, lifestyle, herbals, in addition to regular medicine. And oh shoot, Laura, what else did you ask? Spreading the word. Oh, and affordability. I put there's a really interesting group of physicians and other healthcare providers that work in community clinics. And have to be creative in their suggestions to make sure that it's not too expensive for people. I am for the number 4, us.org. So integrative medicine for the underserved.org. And I think they might be redoing their website right now, but in the past they had this huge resource list of, someone has heartburn. What's a really inexpensive treatment for that rather than having to spend a lot of money on an expensive supplement. So there's a lot of us thinking about access and availability for integrative health treatments. So, herbals will come up. And I always ask people and have a few tricks up my sleeve about treatments. And one of which I think Dr. Adele mentioned about peppermint tea. So the first is peppermint tea is a common name. Making sure that people have the right species. There's a ton of mints. We did a survey in Madison and a lot of people thought they were drinking peppermint. We had it analyzed and it was actually spearmint. So you want to make sure you're doing the right plant species, which takes some, a little bit expertise in order to identify these correctly. Why do we care? Peppermint's higher in menthol, which is one of the active substances in tea. And has like 50% menthol as its essential oil content, and spearmint only has 10 to 20%. So, in most cases, if you correctly brew a peppermint tea, you'll have a bigger bang for your buck on its effects than you will for spearmint tea. So, that's a whole nother lecture, is about correctly identifying plants. Peppermint's got lots of interesting uses. On the gastrointestinal tract, we use it in capsule form for people that have irritable bowel syndrome. It works better in capsule for that than it does as a tea. But as a tea, as we're all familiar with, it's a really wonderful digestive. We call it a carminative, which helps the GI tract to settle down a little bit, but it can actually make heartburn worse for some people. So, there are nuances to herbal medicines that I think are important. And then oscillococcinum is a homeopathic remedy that's been used for colds. I think it actually does have some clinical trials that support its use. It sounds like Dr. Adele Marie has used both of those, and I think it's great. Like, some things work for some people and they don't work for others, and definitely it's important for me personally and my patients to have something that they can use with cold viruses and allergies and all that upper respiratory stuff, because invariably it'll happen that we'll get something. So having something that works well for you. Sayla Barr was wondering about a book. Let's see, there's a ton of herbals out there. Maybe I'll just put into the chat. Rosemary Gladstar's got lots of herbal books. If I were to shamelessly plug the National Geographic book we came up with, it reviews 70 plants and gives you recipes. So
you absolutely should do that.
I don't know. It always feels
Plug
a little
away.
weird.
It's okay.
It always feels a little weird, but it's the National Geographic Guide to Medicinal Herbs. there's 4 of us that wrote it. That can be fun. It's a little out of date. It's 2010, but I think it's still mostly applicable. Let me see, another good plant book. I think Rosemary will give you lots of, kind of mileage and learning about plants and such. And it's, there's a lot of recipes that she provides. Oh, Sarah, you're sweet. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. One thing that struck me during your presentation, and this has come up now, I think in several of the presentations, is this idea that people generally, and I don't know if this is an American thing or if this is a Western issue, but that, if you took, for example, you, David, and then you took someone who's a medicine, like a shaman, let's say, from Ecuador, who has carried, generations of knowledge on medicinal plants, I would say 9 times out of 10, a typical American is going to listen to what you have to say about these plants more than they're going to listen to this other person that comes with these, generations of knowledge. And I'm just curious, since, looking at this, since it's a global, sort of a workshop on global wellness, like, do you have any ideas on how we could sort of, I don't know, like, this is a very kind of esoteric question, but like bridge these things, it's also goes along with this idea of the Pachamama that Luis was talking about, how some cultures feel that nature is like it's an entity in and of itself and like a family member, where other cultures see it as something that we just have to like appropriate and take over. And so I know it's like a big question, but I'm just sort of wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, thank you. We need more talks from Luis. Luis,
Okay.
I hope you're still here.
Yeah.
And Dr. Richter. I mean, I think, oh my gosh, I think about it all the time, because every time I travel, no matter where it is, and now I spend a lot of time in even our backyard, in Madison, in Wisconsin, in the Midwest, meeting all these amazing people from all over the world with just all this amazing wisdom. And I'm all ears for how to have collaborative conferences, meetings. Whenever I can, I try to bring people into clinic or teach medical students. And some of our colleagues from Ecuador have gone over to the medical school when we've done trainings. So I think probably all of us are in different positions where we have that opportunity to start to bridge those gaps and to really create possibilities for shared knowledge and wisdom. So I hope this is just the beginning of that. And yeah, sorry, it was kind of a vague answer, but no. It's on my mind, and it's both for me personal and professional, just because I feel like I learned so much when I have those kind of conversations with my colleagues from different trainings and different professions and different geographic areas, as well as I think it's so important for patients and to match cosmology with recommendations. So, if I have somebody in my clinic who really has an interest and background in herbal medicine, and I don't offer that, and I simply offer a pharmaceutical treatment or an antibiotic or something, it's less likely that that's going to be super effective. It's a mismatch of cosmology. So, I think keeping that in mind of how we can learn about each other and then make the best treatment suggestions is always in my consciousness. So
thank you so much.